Hey y'all, I'm Mia from Mia's Little Farm here in Nashville, Tennessee, and I'm so happy to be here today with Kellogg Garden. Today I want to talk to you about some of my chili peppers. They're just now getting to be ripe, they're beautiful, and there's so many of them. I want to show you what I do to preserve them throughout the year. First though, I thought I'd give you a little look into what's going on in the garden itself. Now, I gave a tour of my garden really early in the spring before anything was planted, when it was just a bare area back here. I had all these great plans for the summer. I got a lot of things planted, and then life happened and the garden kind of took a back seat. Right now, things are a little weedy and overgrown back here. Some of the plants don't look so good. I've actually pulled up a bunch of vegetables already, and you know what? That's okay. I'm not gonna beat myself up over the fact that my garden doesn't look like it belongs in a magazine, because you know what? That's real life. So if your garden looks less than perfect or might be a little overgrown, a little weedy, don't feel bad. I'm about to make you feel a lot better. Let me show you what's going on back here. So I'm starting my tour down in the back half of my garden. What you're looking at right now is a volunteer tomatillo plant that I actually didn't have the heart to pull up, even though it started taking over the blueberry bed. The blueberries were already done producing, so I figured, why not? Does it look messy? Yes, but you know, free tomatillos are always a good thing. Coming over here is part of my butterfly and bee garden. My whole concept for this section of the garden was to kind of make it a haven for butterflies and bees and other beneficial insects. And it's actually done that. There's usually quite a few butterflies back here, all sorts of bees, honey bees, native bees, bumblebees. They all seem to love it. I even get little finches and hummingbirds back here. But it doesn't necessarily look too neat because I have ignored some of the things that I should have done, like deadheading the zinnia. When you deadhead your zinnia, it causes them to put more energy into producing fresh blooms instead of making seeds. Now though, I'm gonna wait till the seed pods start drying out and I'll save the zinnia seeds for next year. But the zinnia bed looked great when it was in full bloom, but now in late summer, it's not looking as good as it could because, as I said, life kind of got in the way. There's some weeds going on down there. Not great. Back here is my raspberry patch. We got a lot of raspberries this year, and I have trimmed away some dead canes, but also the raspberry patch has started to be overtaken with a wild passion vine. It was probably planted by a bird. There's lots of wild passion vines around the area. I was going to pull it out for fear of possibly choking the raspberries, but then I started finding lots of Gulf fritillary caterpillars, like this one right here, who's got raindrops all over it. And so I decided to let it stay so the caterpillars could transform into the beautiful butterflies that they are. The passion vines are the host plant for the Gulf fritillaries. So I've got this rogue passion vine taking over my area back here. And I've got the chickens in the garden. They're not always allowed back here, but I'm hoping that they'll help cut down on some of the weeds and bugs maybe, although they're probably just going to eat my tomato plants. Over here is my herb spiral, which I showed you guys a little of last time. And it's actually not doing bad. I've done a little maintenance on the herb spiral. It's looking pretty good, except for another zinnia plant that's in need of some deadheading and some, actually that zinnia probably just needs to come out. And a yarrow down here that needs to have the dead branches cut off so that it can flourish, start to bloom again. And over here, I have another little perennial area. The whole point of this part of the garden is to fill it with plants that easily reseed or perennials that come back every year. And it was really beautiful when everything was in bloom. But again, I need to find the time in my busy schedule to come out here and weed things and fix things. It's a little butterfly. See, the butterflies still like it. It might not be gorgeous, but the butterflies like it back here. More weeds. I had put down a thick layer of cardboard over the grass before I planted this area, and then we mulched it really heavily. But since the grass tends to take over, it's since grown through the cardboard. That's the back side of my volunteer tomatillo, as well as a nice patch of weeds there. And this was my lemon garden that I was really happy with. Some lemon herbs. I have lemongrass here that is amazing. This started out as a tiny plant, but it's since overgrown everything. There's lemon verbena there. There's lemon balm around the back side. And this was a lemon basil plant that I should have trimmed back a little, but now I'm allowing it to go to seed so I can save seed for next year. And this is one of my remaining tomato plants here. I have torn out several tomato plants already that got diseased or weren't producing well anymore. I do have a couple tomato plants still going, but very soon they're going to come up. This is where I had cucumbers in this bed. I pulled them up because there were too many squash bugs and cucumber beetles. And again, as you see, it's just overtaken with weeds. So many weeds everywhere. This is a burgundy okra. Actually, I'm allowing this to go to seed. I'm waiting for the pod to dry out so I can save seed for next year. This is a really tender, delicious okra. There's one of the pods that's almost ready to be picked. I like to pick them when they're young and tender. And you can see some of my efforts where I've started pulling up some weeds and old plants. That's an old basil plant. I've got beans here that I was letting dry out so I could save seed. I would open a pod and show you, but we've just had a really big rainstorm and everything is super soggy right now. Coming forward, this is another bed where I've torn just about everything out of it and weeds are taking over. I do have some kale growing here that's been munched even through the protective covers, but there are some winter crops here. My goal is to find the time to come completely clean out this bed and plant some cover crops in it, such as clover or buckwheat. There should be plenty of time left in our season for it to start growing, and then I'll turn it under and put a nice layer of mulch in this bed, and then it'll be ready for spring planting. So as you can see, the garden is not lovely. It's very weedy and overgrown. And you know what? I'm okay with that because life happens. I'm a mom to 3. I've got other obligations. I do the best I can in my garden, but I'm not going to beat myself up that it's not picture perfect. I will end this little tour with showing you my garden friend here. Hopefully I can get a good shot of her. This is a garden spider known as a writing spider. They make a little zigzag in their webs, and they're actually wonderful to have in the garden. They eat a lot of garden pests. I just try not to get too close to her web, but she's so pretty. Anyway, are you struggling in your garden? Do you have overgrown plants, dead plants? Do you have a lot of weeds? Is it just frustrating getting to the end of summer and having all the garden cleanup? You know what? I'm right there with you, and it's fine, it's okay. I'm going to take you into the front yard now and show you my front yard beds and talk a little bit about some pepper plants. So right now I'm sitting in my little front yard garden area. I've got 5 little raised beds here. I've got a couple fall crops planted and also my hot peppers down there. I'm going to give you a little tour of my area and then we're going to harvest some peppers. Right here I have a bed that I've planted with fall veggies that are just starting to come up. There's some radishes here, some kale right there. Hopefully the rest will start to appear pretty soon, but there's some tiny seedlings. Back here I have some broccoli and the tail end of the summer zinnias. We still get lots of butterflies here. Pretty soon the zinnias are going to come out when the broccoli starts getting larger. And coming around, there's my comfrey plant. That's a perennial that's always there. And the first of my front yard peppers. They got really blown over in the rainstorm that we just had. But these are one of my favorite hot peppers. These are called Chinese 5-color peppers. And the flowers are purple. And they turn into purple peppers. And then the purple starts to fade into a creamy white color, and then they turn yellow, and then orange, and finally red. And they're spicy at all stages. They're delicious, and this plant is actually a volunteer from last year. They're super easy to grow, they're easy to overwinter, and as you can see, the plants are absolutely loaded with peppers. This pepper here is called Garden Salsa, and they're another delicious spicy little pepper, probably about the same heat as a jalapeno. They start out green and you can pick them at this point, or you can wait till they turn red and then pick them. They're spicy regardless. And over here in this box, these are the only sweet peppers I'm growing this year. They're called Gypsy, and they start out a yellowish color and eventually turn red. They're a perfect little size. They're a really nice looking pepper. And then here, and the plant sadly fell over. Let this be a lesson as to why peppers do need to be staked. This is my poblano. Has lots of peppers on it. It's a very heavy plant. A lot of good looking peppers in there. Poblanos are delicious. They're not too hot, but they're not sweet. They kind of have a smoky flavor when you roast them. They're absolutely delicious. They're one of my very favorite peppers. They're super easy to grow. So now that I've shown you some of my pepper plants, it's time for me to harvest these guys and then take you inside and show you what I'm going to do with them. Hi, welcome to my kitchen. I'd like to show you how I preserve the peppers that I get from my garden. Now I have all the peppers that we picked today as well as some that were harvested earlier. So let me show you some of the things that I do. First, I'll show you what I do with my Chinese 5-color. Now these are the ones that I showed you that start out purple, they fade to a creamy color, then yellow, orange, and red. They're a delicious, super spicy pepper. They're hotter than, say, a jalapeno, but not quite as hot as a habanero. I like to dry my 5-color peppers and use them like red pepper flakes throughout the year. They're super easy to dry. Let me show you what I do. Got some here. These have already been washed and dried thoroughly. It's really important that you do dry them well. And I take some sturdy string and I just string them up. Super simple. And aren't they pretty? They look like little Christmas lights. They're so easy to do. You just take your needle and push it through. And eventually you'll have them all strung up. Now when you are drying peppers, I only dry small peppers this way. If I'm drying larger peppers, I'll use my food dehydrator because they'll probably mold before they go through the drying process. But this is perfect and simple for these little peppers. I don't cram them hard against each other. I like to leave a little space. They can get air. When I get this whole thing filled up, I'm gonna hang it somewhere that has really good airflow, and as they dry, they'll fade or they'll all turn red. And eventually we'll have a bunch of dried red peppers here, at which point I can just push them off the string into a jar, crush them up, and that's my crushed red peppers for the year. Super easy to do, and they look so pretty while they're drying. So that's what I do with a lot of my Chinese 5-color peppers. Super easy, super simple, super yummy. The next thing I'm going to show you is how I make my refrigerator pickles. My family loves pickled hot peppers. Just like you can get pickled jalapenos in the store, this is a homemade version that's so easy and it tastes so much better. This is a batch that I made last week. It's still pickling. Eventually they'll turn a little darker color, but for right now, these are ready to eat and they're delicious. And actually, the thing when you make your own refrigerator pickled peppers, you can keep using the brine. This is a batch that I made several months ago, and as the peppers have been eaten, I just cut fresh ones up and add it to the brine and let them keep pickling. It's probably getting to the end of its life. I'll probably discard this one soon, but that's fine because I have plenty of fresh ones. Let me show you how I make it. Now I have a jar. This is for a quart-sized batch. I make sure my jars are completely sterile. Then while I'm prepping my ingredients, I'll pour boiling water into the jar just to make sure it's sterilized. So let me pour that water out. And I've already got my peppers prepped here. This is a mixture of jalapenos and then the garden salsa peppers that I just picked today. Now, I just have to give a note. I'm sure many of you know this, but when you're cutting hot peppers, it's super important to wear gloves. You can find disposable gloves at your grocery store, at the drugstore. Really, 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 you'll regret it if you don't use gloves. Trust me, I know from personal experience. So I'm gonna take these peppers that I've prepped and I'm gonna fill them, put them in this sterilized jar. There we go. You can push them down, make sure they fit, make sure they all get in there. And now I've got all my peppers in my jar, and now I'm gonna cover it with the brine that's gonna make them pickles. The brine to make easy refrigerator pickles is so simple. It's 3/4 cup of white wine vinegar, 1 tablespoon of salt, and 1 teaspoon of sugar. And it's really important to use white wine vinegar, or excuse me, that you use plain white vinegar. Don't try to substitute wine vinegar or a fancy vinegar. Use plain white vinegar. And I need to give a little talk about salt too. When you're pickling or canning or fermenting, it's really important to use plain salt that doesn't have any added ingredients. A lot of times salt might have an anti-caking agent added, or it might have iodine. Any of those things can affect your finished product. So you can buy canning and pickling salt that's made just for canning and pickling. You can find this in just about any drugstore or grocery store. I like to use sea salt, 100% sea salt. The only thing on the ingredient list is salt. A lot of people use pink Himalayan salt. That's fine too. Just make sure whatever salt you're using is salt and nothing but salt. So I have my 3/4 cup of white vinegar, 1 tablespoon of salt, and a teaspoon of sugar that I have all mixed up here. And I'm going to pour that over my peppers. Make sure it all gets in there. The sugar is optional, but it really helps cut a little bit of the acidity from the vinegar and also helps cut if the peppers are super hot. So I've got the brine in there, and then I'm going to continue filling this quart jar up with water. Going to put the lid on. I really like these plastic lids that you can get from mason jars. You can get them, my grocery store sells them, I've seen them online. And I'm going to give it a nice shake to make sure it stays blended. This is going to go in the refrigerator. It's going to stay there minimum of 2 days for best flavor. At least a week would be better. And you can see the difference in color from the batch that I made last week and this batch that I just made today. So the color will continue to get dull as they continue pickling, and it will continue to get more and more delicious. So definitely, this is something easy you can try with any of your garden peppers. Now, the last thing that I'd like to talk about when it comes to preserving peppers is making your own fermented hot sauce. I love, love, love to make my own hot sauce. I'm on my 3rd batch of the year already. This is some I made earlier in the summer. It's hot, it's spicy, it's delicious. The thing when you ferment your peppers, you can use any mixture of hot peppers that you want and make your own signature blend. Now let's talk for a minute about fermenting. A lot of times people think you need special equipment. I typically do use an airlock like this. This is a batch I've had fermenting a week or so. You can find many different types of airlocks online or at a local fermentation store, a brew house, but that's not necessary. You can ferment without all that fancy equipment, and I'm going to show you how. Now, the important thing when you're fermenting is to keep everything clean. Make sure you use pure salt, and make sure you only use filtered water. You don't want to use tap water. It has chlorine that's going to kill off all that good bacteria that you're trying to get in to ferment your peppers. So you just want to make sure everything's clean and you use good water. I'm going to show you how I ferment in a Fido jar. You can find these jars in many different places. They're easy to find online. They're not very expensive, and they're pretty easy to ferment in if you don't have an airlock. Again, I've had boiling water in this just to kill off any bad germs that might be in there. And the water's cooled down quite a bit, which is good. You don't want it super hot when you start your ferment. Again, I have my peppers prepped. Into this, I'm using a combination of serranos, the salsa peppers. I've got a couple jalapenos in there. I've got just a couple of the Chinese 5-color in there, and I've got some poblanos. I've also added a few cloves of garlic. This is garlic from my garden that I harvested back in the spring. I'm adding some garlic in there, and I've also got some carrot in there. Carrot isn't necessary. I like it, adds a little depth of flavor. It adds a little sweetness, so I like to include a couple carrots. I don't currently have any carrots in my garden. Obviously, homegrown would be best. If you do use store-bought carrots, make sure they're organic and make sure you scrub them really well before you put them in your ferment. And just a word, some people ferment their peppers whole when they make their puree, when they're making pepper sauce. I like to slice them. I always take off the stems, but you see, you have a little cap on peppers. I like to leave the cap on. It adds kind of a depth of flavor to it, so don't get rid of that. Keep the cap. So what I'm gonna do in my Fido jar is I'm gonna take my mixture of hot peppers, my garlic, and my carrots, and I'm gonna pack them into the jar. I think this will just about fit. Can really pack them in there, don't be afraid. Pack them down. Now I've already got my brine made. The brine that you use for fermenting is a little bit different than pickling brine, especially where peppers are concerned. Peppers are a vegetable that tend to mold a little more easily than, say, cabbage or carrots or something else that you might be fermenting. So you typically use a little more salt in your brine. In this case, it's 1/3 of a cup of salt, again, pure salt, to 4 quarts of, let me restart that. It's 1/3 of a cup of salt to 4 cups of water. So I've already got my brine mixed up here. And I'm just gonna pour that over the peppers. I wanna make sure they all go under the brine. And I'm actually gonna cut, I think I'll use one of these poblanos. I'm gonna cut this poblano in half, and I'm gonna stick it on top to keep the peppers submerged under the brine. The little pieces tend to float sometimes. I'm gonna use that. I'm gonna submerge it completely, make sure it's covered in brine. And the thing about Fido, they have these gaskets. You want to make sure that it's new, it's clean, and that it fits snugly. Otherwise, it's not going to work properly. There. That's all ready to ferment. I'm going to put it on a plate. As it starts to ferment, it's going to give off gases, which are going to seep out because of the lock that's on there. The plate's going to catch any drippings that might come out. And the best thing to do is put this in a cool, dark place, such as a cupboard or on an out-of-the-way place on your counter, covered with a towel, and just leave it alone for at least a week, preferably 2 weeks, up to a month or more. If you see mold, you really should throw it out and start again. I make hot pepper sauce every year. I've never experienced mold, so I wouldn't be too worried about it, but it's not a good idea to eat it if you see mold. So that's how I ferment my pepper sauce. After I've let it sit for a couple weeks at least, what I do is I'll take it, I'll open the jar, and I'm gonna drain the peppers from the brine, and I'm gonna save the brine. Then what I do is I'll put the peppers in my Vitamix with a little bit of the brine, and I'll just blitz it until it's a complete puree. And you can add a little bit of brine as needed to make sure it's nice and liquefied. And if you want to go the extra step like I did with this one, is I push this one through a sieve so that it's got all the little bits out. This is nice and liquidy. And then after you're done pureeing your fermented sauce, if you like to make it more like a Tabasco sauce, you can add a little bit of apple cider vinegar, give it a little extra kick. You can find all sorts of jars. You can reuse condiment bottles. You can buy bottles online. Once you have your pepper sauce bottled, it can keep in the fridge indefinitely. I've got some that has lasted almost a year, but then it got eaten, so didn't last quite that long. But it's easy to do. There's so many things you can do with your garden hot peppers, or if you don't have any in your own garden, I encourage you to go to the farmer's market and see what they have. Hot peppers are wonderful, and they can really spice up your winter. I hope y'all have a great day. Thanks for joining me here on Kellogg Garden. Bye now.